The Wizarding World has so many fantastic characters, and if you're willing to dive deep enough, you can find some great backstory and great history about some of those characters. And today, that's what we're going to be doing, diving into the life and love of Professor Minerva McGonagalls. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Real quick, if you're new here, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and turn on those notification bells to make sure that you stay up to date with everything, and it really does help the channel. It helps us grow and it helps promote our content. So before we get into the meat of the story, I need to just give you guys a little bit of a disclaimer here. There is going to be a little bit of discrepancy, mostly in the birth date of Minerva McGonagall, because originally on Pottermore, which is now Wizarding World, it was, I believe, 1936. I know it was the mid-1930s somewhere for her birth date, but that changed when Fantastic Beasts: Crimes of Grindelwald was released, and they gave us the unnecessary fan service mention and vision of Minerva McGonagall at Hogwarts in the 1920s, when in the fifth book itself, in the Order of Phoenix, she tells Dolores Umbridge that she has been working at Hogwarts for 36 years. Now, I might not be great with math, but even I know that the 1920s and the 1990s are not only 30 some odd years apart. So the math doesn't quite work out. But either way, on Pottermore or on the Wizarding World, they have actually removed her birth date from her backstory. So we're going to be covering this without really a specific time frame, at least until they decide when they want her to have been born, which may or may not happen after the release of the third Fantastic Beasts movie, which hopefully should actually start filming soon, which will be a topic for another video. Now, to really understand Minerva McGonagall, we're gonna have to dive all the way back to her childhood, and even just slightly before. So our story starts with a young witch named Isabel Ross falling in love with a Muggle Presbyterian minister by the name of Robert McGonagall. Now, Isabel being a witch and Robert being a Muggle, and being in the time that they were, this relationship wasn't really allowed, so Isabel hid it from her family, and Robert, not even knowing that his love interest was a witch, also didn't really say anything to his family until finally the two eloped, to the fury of both of their families, and they moved into a manse, which is a minister's house, pretty much. It's just a fancy name for it, on the outskirts of Caithness, which is in Scotland. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing the county correctly. After some time, Isabel gave birth to their first child and only daughter, and pining a little bit for the magical life she left behind, she insisted upon naming their daughter after her own grandmother, Minerva. Of course, Robert being a Muggle and being a minister of a church, his parishioners and Robert, and most of the Muggle village, found this name to be a bit odd. After the birth of Minerva, Robert couldn't help but notice that his wife was very moody and a bit secluded, and would often take their daughter off into another room, locking themselves away for hours. This was due to the fact that Minerva was showing great signs of magic even from the moment of birth. Toys from high shelves would end up in her cot. The cat would do her bidding before she could even walk and talk. And her father's bagpipes, which would give Minerva a great sense of pleasure as a child, would play from another room without anybody being anywhere near them. Of course, Robert couldn't help but notice this moodiness and this isolation, but was assured by many of his friends that women were often emotional after giving birth, and Isabel would soon be back to her normal self. This, however, was not the case. Isabel continued to isolate herself and Minerva, and on a more frequent and long-stead times, until finally one night, after much patient and persistent questioning by Robert, Isabel broke down into tears, went into the bedroom and fetched her wand from the lockbox hidden under the bed, and disclosed to Robert what she, and now their baby daughter, really were, explaining to him that she had to keep it secret because otherwise the ministry would come after her. They would charge her and baby Minerva for breaking the statute of secrecy, and they could get into serious trouble. Now, Robert, of course, was blown away by this pronouncement of his wife, by finding out that his wife was a witch, and wondered, of course, what are the parishioners going to think knowing that their minister's wife is a witch. Now, you got to keep in mind that this was back during a time where things were still rocky. They weren't really accepted. Magic and witchcraft really weren't accepted, even in the early 1900s. And so relationships between muggles and magical folks were rocky at the best of times. But Robert loved his wife, and love would prevail. Love does prevail. And he managed to keep the secret, although he did find that this life of secrecy really went against his personality, priding himself on being an upright and honest man, as he should be. He is a minister. He found it hard to keep this covered from his parishioners, but did manage to do so, knowing the consequences should anybody find out. Over time, they would have 2 more children, both sons, Malcolm and Robert Jr., both of whom would start to show magic in due course as well. And Minerva, of course, already a very clever girl, even before being of age for school, would help her mother conceal this magic from the town and raise the boys to know that they have to keep hush-hush on what they really were, or else get into a lot of trouble. Now, Minerva, like I said, being young and still very clever even before school, could not help but notice how the stress of the secret affected her parents, both in different ways, although both very severely. As I stated, her father struggling with wanting to be an upright and honest person and having to keep this very big, very heavy secret, and her mother, being a spectacular witch, having to suppress her magic and keep it on the down low as to not raise suspicions. Minerva was very close to her father and could tell how stressed out he was with this. And Isabel, though she loved Robert, missed the magical world, so much so, in fact, that it said Minerva can remember clearly how long and how much her mother cried, both out of pride and a little bit out of envy, the day Minerva's Hogwarts acceptance letter finally came, and it was time for her to go to school. But of course, Minerva did go to Hogwarts, and like many who come from a similar situation with their families struggling with their magical identities, Minerva found Hogwarts to be a great place of release and joy, where she could be herself and really let her magic shine. It really shouldn't be much surprise either that upon entering Hogwarts, Minerva was already raising eyebrows from her very first night at school, from the sorting. In fact, she is one of the very few known hat stalls. Some of the others who are more well-known characters would be Professor Flitwick, Neville Longbottom, and actually, believe it or not, Peter Pettigrew. Anyway, the hat was stuck between Ravenclaw and Gryffindor for Minerva, ultimately ending on Gryffindor, as we all know. The funny thing here is that later in life, when her and Professor Flitwick were colleagues, they would often laugh and joke about the fact that this sorting hat had the same stall for both of them with different outcomes. From that moment on, Minerva soared academically. She was amazing. She achieved the highest scores possible on both her OWLs and her NEWTs, and of course, through the help and guidance of one Albus Dumbledore, who at the time was the transfiguration teacher and the head of the transfiguration department, she managed the very, very difficult task of becoming an animagus and registering with the Ministry of Magic. Now, we all know she is a silver tabby cat with spectacle markings around her eyes, and we also know that that is one of the hardest bits of magic to achieve. So that right there should tell you how strong and how powerful of a woman, of a witch, that Minerva McGonagall really was. She was so great at magic, she was even a very proficient Quidditch player, playing for the Gryffindor house team until in her final year she took a really nasty fall due to a foul from another player, which resulted in a loss to the Slytherin house team, but no doubt fueled her passion in later life to see Slytherin get crushed by Gryffindor every year, and her passion and love for the Gryffindor house team itself. Upon graduation from Hogwarts, Minerva was instantly offered a position at the Ministry of Magic in the Magical Law Enforcement Department, which she of course accepted, and before starting her new job in London decided to travel home for a few months for the summer to see her family. However, what Minerva didn't expect during this few months stay at home was for her to fall head over heels in love with the son of a local farmer and muggle, Dougal McGregor. Minerva was head over heels for Dougal. In fact, it is probably the only time it could be said that Minerva ever, quote, lost her head, was meeting this young man. They spent many days together, many hours together. They shared a great sense of humor and a fierce love for arguing and debating. And before she knew it, Minerva found herself standing in a cornfield with Dougal down on one knee, making his proposal. To which, of course, she accepted. Now, when she got home that night after accepting Dougal's proposal, she had every intention of telling her family and having them share in their joy. But she couldn't bring herself to do it. In fact, she stayed up all night, weighing her thoughts and her doubts. She lay there awake for hours, thinking about what it would mean, what she would have to give up in order to marry Dougal, because he's not going to move to London with her, nor sit around at home while she spends countless hours, days at a time, in London at work, when he himself was hoping to inherit his father's farm and carry on the family's farming tradition. And having witnessed growing up the struggle from her parents, dealing with a muggle and a witch living in the same household and having to keep it a secret, and seeing how sad her mother was to having give up her magic in the name of love, and how stressful it was for her father to continue to hide not only his wife's but his children's magic from his muggle parishioners and the rest of the village, Minerva the next day decided to tell Dougal that she had changed her mind. And so, leaving him in the exact same cornfield, broken-hearted and bewildered, she packed her bags and headed off to London. Now, to say that Minerva was cold-hearted would be an absolute lie. She was, in fact, broken-hearted. And perhaps this emotional crisis, this emotional state, is what led to her not really enjoying her job at the ministry, though she was very well suited for it. But many of her co-workers had a very anti-Muggle attitude about them, just ingrained into them, and with good reason, of course, being as what they had all been through with Muggles and wizards in the past, which was hard for Minerva given the fact that she was still very much in love with Dougal McGregor, and so she deplored their attitudes. And even though she was a very efficient and gifted employee and very fond of her boss, Elphinstone Urquhart, which I'll put up on screen here because it's a weird name and kind of hard to say, Minerva was really unhappy working at the ministry, working in London. So after 2 years, even though she was offered a fantastic promotion, she turned it down, and she found herself sending an owl off to Hogwarts to see if there were any teaching positions available. The owl, of course, returned within hours, offering her to take up a post in the transfiguration department under the, at the time, head of the department, none other than Albus Dumbledore. Now, Minerva was, of course, greeted with delight and pleasure at her return to Hogwarts, where she ended up striking a great and wonderful, long-lasting friendship with Albus Dumbledore, and she herself becoming a strict but inspirational teacher, much like Dumbledore himself. Now, even though she was working at Hogwarts, she kept in touch and stayed very good friends with her old boss from the ministry, Elphinstone Urquhart, which I really can't say his name without smiling. It is another weird name. It's like Dougal McGregor, but hard to say. Who would actually come to visit her during his holidays to Scotland. And to her surprise, and a little bit of embarrassment, he would propose marriage in Madame Puddifoot's tea shop. But still in love with Dougal McGregor, Minerva turned him down. This, however, did not deter Elphinstone from being in love with her and continuing periodically to ask her to marry him. And Minerva would repeatedly turn him down, even though she knew that Dougal McGregor had gone on to marry a daughter of another local farmer. Minerva just couldn't get over her love for him until the day Dougal McGregor passed away. Now, she was heartbroken by this, but at the same time felt a sense of freedom. She no longer felt guilty for turning him down now that he had moved on, and so shortly after the fall of Voldemort, the first time around, Elphinstone, now white-haired and obviously older, proposed yet again, and this time Minerva accepted. That's right, guys. Professor McGonagall was actually married. Now basically doing backflips out of joy and excitement, Elphinstone, who was now retired, bought a cottage right over in Hogsmeade where they could live so that Minerva could travel easily every day to work. Minerva announced that she would be keeping her name as Professor McGonagall, being as she was established as this, and while some traditionalists sniffed at this, choosing to keep the name of her Muggle father instead, they lived a very happy marriage. And although having no children of their own, her nephews and nieces would come and visit very frequently. This entire time was a great period of fulfillment for Minerva, the happiest she had been in a very, very long time, and the happiest she would be ever again, because unfortunately, their marriage, while joyful and amazing, was cut tragically short after only 3 years. You see, Elphinstone was accidentally bitten by a venomous tentacula, and due to his advanced age, unfortunately, it did not survive and passed away. This tore McGonagall apart, so much so that after Elphinstone's funeral, she couldn't even stay in the cottage. Instead, that very day, that very night, she packed her bags and moved back into Hogwarts to live in the room behind her office. But because of this, she threw herself into her work, becoming the private and brave woman we all know and love today, with very few people, in fact, possibly no one except for Albus Dumbledore, knowing how much she actually suffered. And so, guys, that is the story of Minerva McGonagall. It's actually a bit tragic. It's not one of those uplifting stories. While she is successful, it doesn't necessarily mean a happy ending. So guys, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. What did you think about learning this about Minerva McGonagall? Is there anything I missed out that you would have liked to have known? Anything I could have cut out that you didn't really care about? Let me know so I know for the future when I make more of these videos. And as always, if you enjoyed, please throw a thumbs up on it. And if you are new here again, hit that subscribe button. It's the red one down below. Can't miss it. Red letters say subscribe. You tap on that, and then you can tap the little bell next to it, and you can choose when you get the notifications, or you don't have to do it at all. Thank you if you made it all the way till the end, guys. I look forward to seeing you again. Until then, stay safe, and watch out for those dementors.